Hi guys, it's James from Pace, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about my GALM Anti Plus, which is a new chassis for me. I'm going to run through why I've chosen the parts I've already installed and the plans I have for this chassis in the future. So this is the GALM Anti Plus, which is the latest version of the GALM chassis. I've built this chassis as a second GALM. I still have my rear motor GALM that you've seen before. This is so I can run the high motor again. As some of you will recall from the previous video I did about the rear motor GALM, I sold my 10th anniversary GALM because I wasn't getting on with it when it was high motor. I've really gelled with this now. When I built this, I spent some time thinking about my plans for this chassis and why I wanted to build it and what I wanted it to achieve. So when I built it, I already had some specs in mind that I wanted to run that were not standard, and there is a particular style I like to drive, and I wanted to make this optimal for that. So what I did is I started out with geometry that I knew would work in the way that I wanted to go. Damper settings that I thought would work, I ended up tweaking them a little bit. As this has gone on, this has actually become my favourite GALM now, so I've been adding the new parts to this one as they come in. So we'll start with the front. You can ignore the wheelbase settings on this car. It's a little bit funky, but it's mostly to fit the body that I run with it. Holes were drilled in an odd place, so to get the wheels sitting in the arches, I have to run the arms all the way forward on the front. You can completely ignore that. The geometry is kind of sound and works. It's just an odd looking setup that will be reverted back to normal for when I run other bodies in the future. So I'm running the TC bumper on the front to keep things nice and light, and so the matte carbon matches the matte carbon set that you get with the Anti Plus. I'm also running the new upper arms, the adjustable aluminium upper arms, which are absolutely superb, and I'm really happy with them. You can see here, because of the funky geometry, I've removed the spacer to get as little caster as I can, and it works really well. I'm also running the new lower arms, which I installed on Friday and ran for the first time, and they are surprisingly good. I'm not going to be able to show you this very well, I don't think, but the extension comes out at a slight angle, so they run a bit more like an off-road truck or buggy. It's one of those parts that I installed expecting it to not be that different to the previous arms, which this was running the ES arms on the front before, and almost instantly I felt more front control, better general. I mean, I built them to the same length. I didn't do anything different. I did originally try and put they come with extensions to move the IFS link up and out. And I went to install that originally, but I need to work out the link length, and I'm going to save that because I'm eventually going to change this to the HG version 3 dampers very soon. So I've just taken that off, and I'm just using one of the outer holes on the arm itself. It works great. The lower arms are tremendous. It sounds a bit sort of cliche to say that the new arms are better than the old arms, but they made a big difference. I don't run the older adjustable arms because I found them to be a bit too heavy, whereas these are pretty light. I think I might be wrong, but I think we weighed them at 12 grams, which was, it's a bit more than the ES arms, but the easy adjustment on these is great because all you have to do, hopefully you can see this nice and easily. You've got two options for a grub screw. There was a difference in adjustment if you use this hole instead of this hole, so you get double the range of adjustment. And then the extension that goes into the lower arm has machined holes for the grub screw to sit in and lock, so that it's really easy to match the length left to right. It works really, really well. You can see here the funky wheelbase I was talking about. I'm running the TC suspension mounts front and rear on this, and on the front I'm running the 48.2s, on the rear 61.7 on the front, and 52.7 on the rear. So, yeah, the front end of this is absolutely wicked. It works great. The Ackerman is okay at the moment. This currently has the plastic rack. It's going to get the triple wiper set up when they land, which is coming fairly soon, and it's quite exciting actually. Now that I'm seeing some of the team drivers getting to test it in Japan, I'm very excited to get hold of one myself. So we're running the aluminium servo mount, as I always do. To me, I don't want any flex in where the servo mounts to the chassis, so that's a place I'll always use aluminium mounts. I'm using a JT servo horn, currently set to 20 mil, I believe that is. As I said before, on the rear I'm running the high motor, and I'm running it with the motor facing this direction, obviously with the idler gear. It's just a nice way. I've played around with different. I ran without the idler gear, and I've ran this before on the other side. And this so far is my favourite position with it, all with the motor all the way back. I do want to soon. I'm going to bring the motor forward to just see how it feels now that I've got the chassis a bit more dialed in. This is obviously running. I'm really happy with the way this runs. By the way, it's the reason I'm making this video. There is obviously more to do, more to tweak, but I'm really, really happy with it. I've done the same thing I did on the other Garm, where I've raised the battery tray up so that I can move it back, because as you can see, with its current position, it would just make contact with the TC mounts on the rear. So I've just raised it a few mil, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 mil to make that work. You can see there I'm also running my limited edition spur gear on this one, and I'm running the JT mount. I made a small plate for the back just to mount everything to. So you can see on this, although I need to replace the tape because it keeps twisting, but I've got my Jarvis XX with a capacitor. This one incidentally is a raise because it's an older ESC, and the R404 receiver I've got on the back as well. I'm not running any extra devices. There's no vector or trace or anything like that on this. It's purely just I wanted to start out really simple, and I've just been happy with the way the car drives, so I've left it as it is at the moment. The biggest change I've made since the previous videos I've produced is that I've switched to the Futaba gyro and servo setup on all of my cars. The main reason I've made the change is because I know there's so much potential in this gyro that I need to learn. As somebody who sells these products, I want to learn it. I want to become an expert of this product, but it's proving to be harder than any other products I've ever had before, because so much of gyro setup is all about personal preference. And so I can get my cars working great, but when I try and help another customer, they've just got different wants and needs. And what I'm trying to do is get to the point where I can just help anyone at any time with this setup. So I'm running a CT701 in this chassis. My other Garm now has a CT500 because I also wanted to test that out, and my Travis has a CT700 because I already own that one. And all three are now running the 550 gyro. Incidentally, I run all three with the 2-wire setup, so I'm using channel 1 and 3. You can definitely use the 1-wire setup using the S-Bus. It's just the way I've got them set up. It's more convenient for me. It's what I'm used to. We should probably talk about the rear suspension as well. So I'm running the latest adjustable arms, the Type 3s. I'm really, really, really happy with these. They work superbly. I'm running 6 degrees trailing angle on these, which is extreme, but I quite like it. It works really well. And I'm running them very short, almost as short as they go, in fact. One thing you'll see, or two things you'll see, is that I'm still using the plastic hubs. That's going to change very soon. I just wanted to keep things simple and run these hubs with these arms and see how they worked before I changed them. And the other thing you'll see is the back end of this car is quite dirty. Now, the reason for that is because I went to Germany in February for the Clash of the Titans event that I was judging, and I flew there nicely, no problem at all. This car has a Yokomo gear diff in that I've been testing. I'm a big fan of gear diffs, and I wanted to find an option that worked well in the Garm. I was running the Rhino Racing CLSD, and it works fine. It's not a problem. The one I have is for a YD2, so the fitment was a bit funky, as I've showed before on this channel. And since then, they've brought out the Garm specific versions, but I may get one. I'm not sure. They're not quite my favourite, because my favourite thing to have in a diff is consistency. I don't like it so much when the diff changes. And obviously the point of the CLSD is that it changes and locks. I'm sure if I played around with it, I can make it work for me, no problem at all. But I currently prefer the ball diff, and I actually prefer a gear diff with very, very thin oil, like 1,000 weight oil in. That's my preferred go-to setup. Now, when I flew back from Germany, my diff exploded during the flight. So I cleaned it all up, but I need to strip the car down and actually wash all of the parts. So you can see on the... I'm not sure if you can see, but I can see here there's a load of dirt that's stuck to the side of the chassis. You know, you can see that. It just needs a proper strip and clean, which is going to happen very soon. But I've been a bit busy because we've had lots of cool events going on in the UK lately. We had Vivian over from SRC in South Africa. Dale from Asbo arranged a trip for him to come over, and they did a tour of UK tracks. So I managed to make it to Ronin, NRD and Slidehouse when he was attending those tracks, which was really fun. Super fun days. But it meant that I was doing more driving than testing and tuning. and grabbing lots of photos as well for social media. So yeah, I've got a bit more maintenance and cleaning up to do on this chassis before I run again next weekend. Now, still running the Velino 08C tyres. You can see they're getting nicely worn on the back. They're still my go-to tyre of choice, and I like to run the 30s on the back and the 26s on the front. They're allowed at almost all of the UK tracks now, so I end up running them all of the time. The gear diff that I'm running is from a BD10, I believe, or BD11, and it's a 38 tooth pulley instead of a 39 tooth pulley, so it does change the gear ratio slightly, and you have to adjust the belt tension, but it works okay. It's quite a cheap diff. The quality isn't incredible, so there's a good chance that the leaking on this was maybe not down just to temperature and pressure on a flight. Maybe it was just ready to break the seal. So yeah, there's a good chance that that's going to come out and be replaced with another option at some point soon. You can see here I'm also using a fan mount with the overdose fan cover because I'm not currently running a fan on the ESC, purely because it's been cold and winter here and I haven't needed one. So to save the power and reduce the noise, I've been running without a fan, so I thought I'd just chuck the fan cover there to cover the gap. Running the Overdose V3 motor in this. I think I'm going to move away from the V3 motors fairly soon. I love them to bits. I absolutely adore the way they feel. I know the noise is kind of a bit polarising and you either love it or hate it, but I think I need to be running a more modern motor more of the time. So I've got a few of these and I may end up selling them or just holding on to them and putting them away for a while. This chassis is also running the V2 knuckles on the front still. They're my go-to knuckle of choice. The ES knuckles I've got on the rear motor are fantastic, and actually they've really impressed me. Again, I was a bit surprised at how much they impressed me. And what I've sort of decided, which there's a very good chance I'm going to change my mind and go back on what I say here, but I've sort of decided that this chassis is going to get all the new upgrades and the rear motor chassis is going to get all the ES upgrades and keep it a bit more straightforward and simple. They drive so differently, it's quite incredible. Even though the weight bias is almost the same, I think it's within 1% or 2%. The feeling of the chassis is very different, and a lot of that's down to geometry and tuning and things like that, which is to be expected. But also the rigidity difference between this chassis and the Transrain chassis that's on the rear motor at the moment gives the front end a totally different feel. This front end is a lot more planted, a lot more stable, and more in line with what I like, and the sort of old school Overdose feeling that everyone used to talk about. The rear motor is faster, it's easier to sit on angle, and possibly better for competition, although the high motor did very well at the RCDC event late last year. So it's not to say that this isn't good at competition. I think if you were chasing speed, the rear motor might be the better base. If you're chasing style, this is possibly the better base. But hey, it's all down to tuning and your personal preference, so your mileage may vary. I am running the centre post on this chassis that works superbly well on the Anti Plus chassis. So you have, as you can see here, I've got it all the way back. You can flip this round and you've got 3 holes on the bottom and 3 holes on the top. So you've got a bunch of different options to move that. You can see I also chopped my battery holder a bit more than I needed to because the clearance for the spare gear is kind of close, but not that close. And I just went to town thinking that I'd be able to run any option I wanted. But I went a bit overboard, so yeah, ignore that. What else? So yeah, running the new single springs on the front and the twin coil springs on the rear. A lot of people talk about the twin coils being a bit strange because they've got a helper spring that is essentially fully compressed when you're on the deck like this, but actually what they really are doing is they're controlling the chassis as the rear lifts. So they do work really well. All of the helper springs for all 3 pairs are identical, so you don't need to actually you just need to swap the main spring. So yeah, the twin springs on the rear, they work really well, and most of the control is all about the lift and as you unweight the chassis, which is why they're recommended for the rear. I am also, you can see here, running 2 ball studs because I was testing running even wider than the standard shock tower will allow, but I've gone back to the widest position on the standard shock tower. On the front, I'm running I think these are 6 coils, front and rear, single spring with a new type, and the twin spring on the rear. Because it's a high motor chassis, I am running the high motor braces on the rear, but I actually run them on the rear motor as well because I find them much better than the standard ones. They're not as pretty as the standard ones, but they are much more rigid, and they don't flex up and down with the chassis. One of my plans is to keep this chassis fairly simple. I am going to add a vector to it, and I am going to add a few more upgrades as they come in. Like I say, the steering's going to go on this. I need to paint a body. I've been saying it every single video, but my plan is to paint a body, so I'll reset the geometry on this with the lower arms and things like that to suit a normal car rather than an oddly drilled old JZX90. You might be able to tell I'm pretty lazy when it comes to bodies. I have to be in the right mood to paint a body, and I'm quite, I hold on to them for a very long time and don't mind running a really old body. I've got a lot of memories with the bodies that I'm currently running. They've done many trips to many countries with me, and they're plastered in stickers that were gifted to me from various people. So I like to hold on to them. Needs must, and a new body will be incoming at some point in the probably distant future. One other thing that's coming very soon will be the front bulkhead as well. So this is going to have the whole new front end on with the bulkhead, the lower arm, the upper arm, and the wipers. So the whole front end of this will be very different to the front end on the rear motor. Judging how good the upper arms have worked, I've put those on the rear motor already, and I'm very tempted to get another set of the lower arms to put on there as well, because I really love how they work. Annoyingly, when I was installing the lower arms, I managed to scratch one, which is really frustrating because I hadn't even taken photos of them yet. So yeah, that might also be an excuse to get another set for the rear motor so I can take some pictures. You can see here with the lower brace, if I twist that a little bit, I'm missing the screw at the front, and that was just a small test that I was doing just to feel the difference between running one screw and two screws, but you can see it's still super tight. I wasn't able to tell much of a difference, to be perfectly honest. It was just an idea that I had that I forgot to put the screw back in when I finished. So yeah, that's but you can see I can't actually twist it, so it's essentially super rigid even without that screw, which is probably why it didn't feel any different. So thanks for watching this video, and if you'd like to see more like this, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with a friend. Maybe drop it a like and leave a comment below if you've got any questions about what you've seen, or if there's something you want me to talk about in a future video.